Probably the biggest stumbling block I find that holds organizations back is not connecting end to end. And they don't connect end to end because I do my patch, you do your patch. And that silo thinking is a behavioral challenge.
Welcome to Process Pioneers, the show that takes a deep dive into the minds of decision makers, key influencers, and process experts who are pioneering the world of everything process.
Welcome to another episode of Process Pioneers. My name is Daniel Rayner. I'm the host of Process Pioneers. And in this series, I get to sit down with different business process management practitioners from a diverse range of organizations and a diverse range of levels within an organization, sometimes internal, sometimes external as a consultant. And, you know, I think that's where a lot of the value in this series is coming from, is gleaning from different people that have different experiences, because, you know, you're never going to find an organization that's exactly the same as another. And today I have the absolute privilege of sitting down with Ian Sharpe, who is the Associate Director of Business Transformation at Western Sydney University, and has, you know, worked in a number of different roles in digital transformation globally. So Ian, I'm very privileged and excited to sit down and talk with you today.
Well, thank you, Daniel. It's my privilege and pleasure to share some of the jigsaw pieces that I've had in my career with the wider Process Pioneers community, and of course, learn from other people too, as part of starting those important discussions around the world.
That's great. Looking forward to it. So what we might do, because that was a very brief introduction on my part, if you want to take us back to maybe the early days of where process really piqued your attention, and then take us on a journey leading up to where it's led you to today.
Sure. So I'm going to wind back the clock quite a few years, and it actually starts prior to process. So I'm a philosophy graduate, and the key thing you learn as a philosophy graduate is why, and to keep questioning. And that's your 5 whys approach. Not just that, of course. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that. But in essence, I did that. I graduated, came out into the workforce. And one of the first things I did was, when you're trained to critically think, it becomes a nasty habit. And you look at the thing and you say, why does that work that way?
Right.
And somebody will typically say, well, we've always done it that way, or, you know, what would you know? And if it's problematic, you often make the mistake of saying, but shouldn't it be this way? Yeah. Or you start to question to understand.
Yes.
And from that place, the more you question and say, that's a problem, that's a problem, that's a problem, very quickly your reward is, well, you go fix it. And it's very difficult to fix things, especially things in this context happen to be a business office environment, without saying, well, how should it work?
Right.
Now, I didn't know at the time, but what I was doing was capturing the as-is through my investigations, and the to-be through my conversations and engagement with the people who owned the parts of that process. So I did a really silly thing at that point. I actually fixed it with the help of others. And
Right.
even worse, it stayed fixed. Now, Daniel, when you fix a thing that's broken and it's been a bugbear for other people, what is your typical reward? You fixed a broken thing. You've made people's lives better. What do you typically get as your next challenge?
More broken things.
More broken things. So then I went insane, and I kept fixing them with the help of others, because we don't deliver things just by ourselves. Sure, you can think about things by yourself and say, well, it should be thus and so, but somebody's got to agree to it. And you don't really fix things in the real world by just fixing it in your head. You have to make it live, and it has to be sustainable. And this requires other people and their buy-in, their agreement, collaboration, whatever the answer might be. We all know the truth of this. And this is when I went really mad, because what's your reward for continuing to fix problems? You get bigger problems, right?
Right.
And sooner or later, in fixing those larger problems and helping them stay fixed, that tipped me over into project management. You couldn't just say, well, it's 1, 2, 3 done. You needed to think about the people to coordinate, the risks that were involved, what resources did you really need to tackle that problem, bring down the elephant, so to speak, and or create an entirely new elephant, some might argue. And so the discipline of, I went from critical thinking to process to project and now program management, and I'm over 21 years new to that profession, because you're always learning, you're
Yes.
always dealing with a new circumstance, and parts of it might be familiar to you, but using a range of disciplines to make things, get them clear, get them created, get them living and breathing, and achieving the outcome that you really want is a short summation of my career. And I've been very, very fortunate in my career to have had a number of opportunities in Fortune 500 companies, in the security sector, in the technology sector, and now in the higher education sector, and along the way working with organizations such as NASA on those kind of challenges worldwide from my consulting days.
Yes, yes, that's great. Now, in a number of the interviews I conduct, I talk with different people that kind of fell into the role of process. You know, they might have been within a large organization, and there wasn't a process team or department or even a label or anything like that, but they naturally just identified problems with the way the business was delivering value, and they naturally sought to fix those problems. And how can we improve that process? How can we make it more efficient? How much do you think of it is a mindset that is comes naturally to some people, and for others it's, there maybe it doesn't come natural to identify problems and improve a process?
I'm not a great believer in predestination from personality. I think we
Right.
learn ways. There are some people who are naturally predisposed a little bit, not a limitation, to think of the world with broad brushstrokes. Does that mean
Right.
they're good at process management or re-engineering? No. It means that they pattern the world in a slightly different way than the person who liked to connect the Lego blocks or sort them in a particular way. And
Right.
that's okay too. We actually need a diversity of perspective to be effective in business
Okay.
process re-engineering,
Mhm.
because I have one golden rule: others see things we do not. And I can guarantee the clearer I am on something that I've created, the more sure I am I need to check it with other people who may use that process or are involved with it or connect to it in some way.
Yes.
So I think there's always a nature of work that people like or not, but it's not limited by how you were born any more than when people argue about a leader's born or made. I said, that's a stupid question.
Right.
If leaders were just born, there's nothing we could do about it. And there is, in fact, a lot of things we can do about it. And setting the context to enable people to do this important work is very much a dimension of leadership.
Yes.
Permission to play is a simple way of putting that.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting point, and an important point that you made about making sure that you include those people, that the process practitioners, the ones that will be conducting that process when it has been improved or changed. They need to be brought along the journey as well, because it's not, if you might come up with the best process in the world, the most efficient process, and if you hand it to someone that doesn't want a bar of it because you're storming in and changing the way they've done things for the last 5, 10, 15 years, then it doesn't matter how effective. Exactly. Doesn't matter how effective it is, it's not going to get executed. So.
Yeah, there's another thing I find a lot of practitioners fall into the trap of. So, first of all, when I say consult everybody, I mean from the people requesting what that process is, say a service, for example, leading a major transformation program with 265 services at the moment,
Right.
through to people fulfilling that, people passing the ball on to the next, people who want the outcome from that process, not just what's going on, but we're running processes to define things and make things better. And the good news is humans are naturally wired to love patterns and certainty. So processes help.
Yes.
Most processes help. Some people's processes are spaghetti, but that's a different story. Speaking of the world in general. So, but to be able to understand that diversity of perspective with a view that whatever we're doing here, it has to add value. It has to be sane. Whose definition of value? Whose definition of sanity? And that's a problem. So anybody thinks that and I've seen this with a lot of people starting out early in their career, thinks process management, mapping, re-engineering, all of that continuity of the family is just about the flow, misses that 80% of the work, at least on a good day, is about working and influencing with people.
Right.
On a good day, because regardless of the facts, the nasty truth is you still have to deal with the way people feel. And you gave a really good example of that. So somebody's come in and they come in and they stick a big finger in somebody's face and says, what you've been doing is wrong for the last 12 years. Now you will have a fight on your hands. It might be guerrilla warfare. It might be open warfare. You will have a fight on your hands if you approach it in that Muppet way.
Right.
So I think what you're alluding to is that the skill set of behavioral skills, please, folks, let's not say soft skills. They are challenging. They are vital. They make a very real world difference to being able to engage and align people is equally critical as the technical skill set of defining your logic, your rationale, your skill set in terms of any system you might use to bring those things together. And the truly excellent people on process I see on the planet are strong in both. Strong kung fu in both.
That's great. And you've obviously, been involved in a lot of digital transformation projects that involving process work, process management, understanding, improvement. What's one of the biggest challenges you see an organization face when they're trying to either adopt BPM, so maybe they're just starting out, or maybe they're just wanting to use it on an enterprise-wide level, or, I guess increase their maturity in how they're managing their processes?
Okay. Well, if they're thinking about improving their processes and what those processes are to begin with, that's a really, really good start, because most organizations I've encountered in my career, it's not that they give lip service to them. They get that it's important, but connecting the dots between where we're going as an organization, be it an agency, be it a corporation, whatever the organization is, it's connecting the dots between how we run things and why we, really shows how we think about things as the organization.
Right.
Probably the biggest stumbling block I find that holds organizations back is not connecting end to end.
Okay.
And they don't connect end to end because I do my patch, you do your patch. And that silo thinking is a behavioral challenge that's got to be overcome. It is normal and natural for people to focus on their processes. That's fine. But what about the inputs, things that are coming across the fence? Something comes, I've dealt with many sales teams over the years, and one of their conversations, they say, something comes across, the sales team, throw something across, and the delivery team go, what is this thing? And then there are problems.
Right.
It's a very simple process thing. You ask the delivery team, and the sales team has said, well, we've got it all perfect and good, and the client is happy. And they said, yeah, for now. They got the price that they wanted. How's the delivery team going? Oh, well, they just have to deliver it. I said, that is a naive view.
Right.
Let me ask the delivery team. So I went and recorded the delivery teams in this organization some years back and said, tell me what your experience is when something new's been sold. And to the last one of them, they said something like this: things come over the fence. Sometimes it's a ball, sometimes it's a grenade. I said, what made the difference? The extent to which we were involved. And when it came a grenade over, did it just get you? And they said, no, it got the client too. Because we were set up, we were sold red. In other words, moment one was a process failure. And it was a failure of inclusion. Nobody on the sales side intended for that to happen. And yet, so we cured it. And the really simple cure was a process cure. No sales commission without delivery sign-off. And you don't get your commission until the project is at least partway delivered. And that depended on circumstances. And this was really important because if you want to change behaviors, if you want to get process to work, you have to have it being used, right?
Right.
For it to be used, you have to have behaviors aligned. Everybody knows that. That's just good common sense. What most people don't realize is you don't change individuals. You say, what is it in our context that makes those behaviors feel okay or not?
Right.
Because lots of good people, when I talk to those sales teams, lots of people in the sales teams who were smart, they were capable, these were not Muppets.
Yep.
And yet Muppet decisions were occurring. And it wasn't just because people were following a bouncing ball of process here. What it was that they were doing what they believed was right and what other people did. And this is a little bit like, say, when you first get into a bath with too much hot water, and at first, you need to acclimatize. Once you've acclimatized, you're fine. But a loved one popping a finger in that bath water will probably burn themselves. And so we acclimatize as people to the context we're in. Context, by the way, is the real word behind culture.
Okay.
So when you say culture and treat it as something nebulous, no, it's not. Well, how do we do things around here?
Right.
What makes that feel okay or not? And if you don't address that, you will have a limited lifespan in terms of process management.
Yes.
Because it's like, as the moon goes around the earth, there's a gravitational attraction there, keeping that relatively in place. For any physicists who may be listening in, yes, I know I'm simplifying, but the reality is there's something gravitational that's keeping those behaviors in place or aligning it to you. A better example, it's like iron filings aligning to a magnetic field. You can't see the field, but you can see its effect.
Right.
So you need to look for the effect of what makes behaviors that feel okay that are going to take you away from process.
Yes.
And I'll give you a real world example on this. So NASA has a famous example where a lander shut off its descent engine 40 meters above the ground. Actually, I tell a lie, 40 feet. But nevertheless, the effect is the same. Boom. And the question becomes, you just destroyed, for some unintended reason, several $1 million worth of deep space probe. Nobody goes, oh, that's okay, we'll get it right next time. You get forced to look into why.
Yes.
What they found was that the engineers who built the probe had found that a land had a process to follow, quality checking. Well, that's fine. This is normal. They check the deployment of the legs. They find, there's a problem. One of the switches on one of the legs is wired backwards. And they found that during testing. Process management success. They then fixed that, fixed a defect. Good job. They then ignored process, which says test every fix, retest to make sure it's right. Because they ignored that, because they were in a hurry up, get it done mode, a lot of schedule pressure, a lot of budget pressure, money is running out. This is all good intent, and these are some of the most professionally astute engineers in the world who did this. It wasn't a problem of lack of brains. Ignored the retest step. Didn't forget about it, ignored it. Under the pump, got to get this done. It'll be fine. It's a simple fix. They never picked that rewired switch now sent two signals to the guidance computer. First signal, bang, I'm on the ground. First signal, I'm deployed as a leg. Second signal, I'm on the ground. 40 feet above the ground, guidance computer goes, deploy. Leg deploys, signal comes back. I'm deployed. Say the three legs. And the third leg says, I'm also on the ground. And the guidance computer goes, cool, I've done my job now. Switch off. Bang. One process ignored. Really bad outcome. So even very little well-intentioned mistakes, the problem was not the process. The problem was what made it feel okay to ignore that process.
Right.
I'm not saying you've got to stick to process every single time, but you've got to be really careful what signals you might have sent in your organization to unintentionally say it's okay not to do this.
Yes, that's amazing. What a story.
It's a good story, and it makes the point real quick. It's an expensive mistake.
It is, yeah. And now I'd be interested to hear from you, because I'm assuming, you've got also some stories about some real successful wins of where maybe a process was tweaked, whether it was an incremental improvement or whether it was a radical innovation, and it actually delivered a ton of value to the organization. Do you have an example, one that stands out to you maybe?
Well, that's the holy grail, isn't it? And we'd all love that example and be able to say, see that? That saved a truckload of cash or the truckload of effort. But there's actually 3 budgets we're managing here in the 21st century, and especially in 2020. And it'll be beyond for some time. There's the budget of money, of course.
Yep.
There's a finite amount of time we all have. But the third and the hardest budget to manage is attention.
Right.
It's hard to earn it. It's very quickly spent, and you'd better spend it on the right things, especially at an executive level if you want to show an improvement. Now, the mistake lots of people make is to try and make it tangible, cashable. Right. That's great. Hey, if we fixed a process and we saved the company $1 million, that's nice. That's cool. But if the organization then goes and spends $1 million on rubbish, whatever that might be, that really wasn't a saving. So you've enabled things. And most of the thing I find out of process management work is you enable a change. Now, you might save time. Are you really saving that time? Or is somebody now going and spending that so the work fills up the day?
Right.
Are you really saving money? How do you know that value is going to land? And who is on the hook to have that landing? And I think that that's a really important part. I like to define roles, authority to do that role, because if you don't back people to do the role, you're answering all of the questions, and accountability. Right. What is the reasonable accountability? Not responsibilities. They're just duties. They're bullet points. They're not where the buck stops.
Yes, right.
Accountability. Because unless you're clear on that, who is accountable for realizing that value? Now, I have witnessed many initiatives where good process was put in and ignored, became shelfware, gathered dust. That's delivered exactly no value. Yes. Or people who continued to do a part of the process that they liked over the years. I mean, speaking broadly, we all know these cases. Have I ever seen a case where you get real world value? Yes, but not without very strong executive buy-in, because somebody has to keep holding the course and say, we're going this way. There's the famous historical example of Cortez burning the boats. Now, that wasn't a process improvement suggestion, but it stopped people going back to the old ways very quick. Right. I'm not saying we burn anything, but sometimes we make an informed decision to change things. And the really successful programs are the ones that are never just looking at business process management or improvement. They're always hand in glove with strong leadership and effective change management, because, hey, we know from a process perspective, build it, and people don't come unless you ingrain that in the system.
Yes. That's great. And you mentioned there about executive buy-in. For someone that's listening right now and, maybe they hear you talking about that story about NASA and they're maybe identifying some processes that maybe the organization doesn't understand, but they're like, hey, we really need to understand our processes, because I think there would be areas of opportunity, of efficiency there that we could tap into. But as you're saying, we need to get that executive buy-in. You need to have that senior leadership that is on board, that's willing to invest that time, that money, and the attention. So how do you get executive buy-in?
Oh, really good question. So I think we're all clear there's no magic bullet, but here's a few things I've found that have helped from my experience. First, I also just want to clarify in my story before, it wasn't NASA's engineers that made that mistake. It was the contracting organization to NASA who were doing that build.
Right.
So everybody's an executive in their own lives. If you think about your personal lives, where do you put attention to? Stuff you care about. Whatever that is, well, that's going to be different for people. So take the same mindset. You go and talk to somebody who's leading an area or an organization. It could be a senior manager. It could be a team leader. It could be a chief executive officer. It could be a board member even. If you're going in to talk with anybody, the natural thing that everybody does is, I'm here to talk to you about process management. I'm here to talk to you about what's really frustrating you and how we can make it better. Now we're earning a bit more attention.
Right.
And if we think about what is it that they care about, what language do they use? That's how you've got to think about this heading in. And you've got to do your homework, you've got to prepare, not to try and influence inappropriately, but to understand, how does that person think?
Right.
What do they actually care about? And what are they being driven to care about?
Yes.
So, for example, somebody may care about overall net savings. Another person may care about their ability to support an audit and to avoid headaches with that. And those are quite different measures. So, I think that the third thing that's useful here with buy in is understand not what somebody is asking for, but why. What need are they really trying to fulfill?
Right.
Now, that need might be, go away and don't talk to me about this process stuff. It's all fine and it's all good. And yet, we've got to talk about the unpleasant reality that it's not, and it's actually causing them some pain.
Right.
In the same way a doctor diagnoses, right? So from a buy-in perspective, the first thing I would suggest is we need to shut up and listen.
Right. Okay.
We want to talk about things and be excited about things. It almost never works.
Yes.
I've never had success that way. We need to be able to listen and understand and then query, find out what they care about. Can you connect the fact that that process or that group, that process family is causing them a headache? They may not be able to, but we can connect the dots and help them. And it's not because these aren't silly people, but if they think and act in a totally different way, to that diversity point, expecting them to adjust to us is a recipe for failure. It's got to be
Yes. Right.
adjusted the other way around.
Yes. Yeah. That's great. And I have heard stories of, different people within organizations that they struggle to get executive buy-in, whether they've really made an effort or an attempt or not. But what
They
they
probably have.
Yes, true. And what they'll do is they will then take it upon themselves to, well, I'll start just in my project. I'll just start in the little area, a piece of work that I'm working on. We'll realize some value there from this process improvement work. And there's one particular place I'm thinking of as an example where it then spread to the business unit. The business unit noticed the project that was taking place and the improvements that were happening there. And they were like, we need to adopt this sort of process-centric way of running our business unit. And then the department took notice. And then before they knew it, the executive team was like, hang on a second, like this department is thriving because of the processes that they're understanding and improving. We're going to mandate this enterprise-wide now because it's done such a lot of great value, or brought a lot of great value to that particular area. So I guess that's another way that if you're struggling to get executive buy-in because they can't see the value and they want to be able to see, well, show me that it works. Don't tell me all of these things that like all this smoke and mirrors sort of stuff. Show me a real life example where it's delivered real value, and then potentially maybe I will give it a little bit of my attention.
Well, that's the classic example, and there's been many examples of this over the years. The example of the person who came in and said, we're buying too much stuff from too many different suppliers, and then piled upon, showed the executive by piling just rubber gloves on the table and just had said, this is how many different rubber gloves we buy in this organization. And whoosh, tipped over this huge mountain of rubber gloves, different types, not the total number of gloves, let's be clear. So sometimes, proof of concept is a good way to go. And again, I think why that worked is that person thought about what need those people were trying to fulfill.
Right.
And if that's an important part of avoiding a power struggle as well, because if you get into a power struggle with the executive, you're probably not going to win. And even if you do, it will have lasting frustration for you. I'll put it that way.
Yes.
So when we want the same thing as what somebody else needs, and we've helped them make that connection, then, hey, it's working well over there. Let's do more of this works. But if somebody says, you know what, we don't work or act or think in in the same way at all as this, and then an organization comes in and says, that's what everybody's now doing, it can actually have the opposite effect. So yes, I agree that show me the proof is a good way of going, and it can spread that way naturally, but it's also a slow way to go. And we
Right.
need to make sure that whoever's leading that, when they go and they get excited, now you've got the attention, now you've got the imprimatur, you've got to be sure that they don't go and start treating the world as nails with their new hammer,
Yes.
because it may not fit all parts of an organization well. For example, marketing does have process, but creative divisions within marketing don't necessarily naturally fit how an engineering department may work. And I've seen organizations try to mandate that everywhere, instead of saying, you know what, you're trying to fix something that's not yet broken there. Why are you trying to have a one size fits all magic hammer everywhere?
Right.
Yeah, include them, ask them by all means.
Yes.
Mandating can be a mistake. So we need to be careful with what the nature of the work is. Some of it
Right.
is not well suited to process.
Yes. Okay.
Heretical view, I know.
So, I mean, you've done involved in quite a number of transformational projects. How important is BPM to a transformational project? And I mean, I know you just finished that point by saying BPM isn't for every area or every project or every transformation, but talk to us about that.
Yeah, sure. So we're talking about a transformation. If you're putting in systems, processes, obviously, a new way of working, it's usually the crucial backbone.
Right.
But it's not the only backbone. And that's the point I was making before, to say neglect behavior at your peril. You can define a process, it can be perfect and good, it can be a thing of wonder and beauty, and you'll sit back and admire it, saying, this is awesome. If only it worked, because people don't follow it.
Yes. Right.
Yeah. And it's the same definition. The aim on a project, for example, or a program, is not to spend the money, it's to unlock the value. And this is why I'm goal directed in what we're trying to achieve here. So from a challenging and change perspective, it's a pretty important thing, because really what it's doing is crystallizing how we should be doing this thing, and where it's fine and it does not need to change, and where it does need to change. And then the question becomes, what will it really take to make that work under the hot sun?
Right.
And I find most people go, well, you need to tweak, change, twist, and do this. And I said, that's cool. Now let's add people to it. What would it really take to get people doing that? Oh, well, the big boss needs to, put the thumb on, you've got to do this. Well, yeah, that could help. Wouldn't it be far better if we built this with people?
Right.
And gave them a stake and an ownership on it?
Yes.
Now, along the way, we're going to find some people, and this has been my experience in every transformation I've ever run, you're going to find some people who will go, it can't possibly work. And you go, okay, cool. I'm going to assume that you're right. Show me why. I want to learn, because if it can't possibly work, if it won't work in logic, it's not going to work in reality. I don't want to invest anything on something that won't work in reality. We need to have a different conversation. So let's talk about what really needs to happen here and who else should be included. And one of the best questions, especially when you get the nope, no, not going to play, not going to do it, no way, no how, it can never work. There's a really useful question.
Okay.
So, Daniel, can I ask your advice?
Sure.
Do you know anybody who could resist answering that question?
No, that's fine.
So long as you're genuinely intending to do so. And so I would say it's critical to have that backbone.
Yes.
Sometimes in the case of services transformation work that I've done, sometimes you look at the service and you reverse engineer out the new process. You're actually doing that process thinking in the design of those services, but sometimes there is a blank sheet, or there are several versions of the process, and mostly in here. So if you went to process first, then you built things, that makes sense if you have the time to do that. But if you know how it should work anyway, then there's no harm in reverse engineering out what the process should be, so long as you're having those critical conversations and having that critical thinking.
Yes. Okay. That's great. And now looking towards the future, obviously, technology has meant that it's almost been a carrot for some organizations where new technology pops up, another organization implements it, they're getting value out of it. And then all of a sudden the organization wants to adopt it because it's working for them and they've adopted it. But BPM, it's with technology, it's evolving quite rapidly, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts over the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years. Just the future, the immediate future. What will BPM look like? And also, obviously, understanding that every organization is at a slightly different maturity level, so they may require something slightly different.
Well, very good news. I don't think so I'll talk about technology in a moment. Very good news. I don't think the critical thinking has changed in over 4,000 years. What we're thinking about is different, but fundamentally, logic is fundamentally unchanged, right?
Right.
By the way, most people say common sense. I'd say that's a form of logic too. But common sense about what in relation to how, right?
Right.
So if I think about trends we're seeing now, look, we're seeing a range of really good mapping tools and management systems. For example,
Yep.
University uses ProMap by Nintex. We're finding that a really good solution to help get everybody on the same page. And there's a continuity of not just running the service, but actually managing the service and capturing, important differences where services are related to that. They're services around process, fundamentally. Yes. And it's really important in all organizations to have that kind of DNA.
Right.
From a future perspective, look, technology in 10 years' time, I challenge even Steve Jobs to call that out. What I can tell you in the near future is seeing process engines that go to start using predictive analytics,
right.
to start to understand what is our data spun into information telling us about how long things take, where are the process improvement opportunities next, there's an element of AI in the narrow AI, not the Terminator sense, let's be clear, as well as machine learning to say right. Elements of process, increasingly humanity is moving, this is just the truth of my belief, is moving to a place where there's a lot of work, process to find the flow of information and the nature and the need of information. And if you see things like robotic process automation coming into play, where it suits, which complements humans to say a human decision is required here. There's something out of the box. Where do we best use our judgment and attention on? I think that these are things that we are starting to already see in play with process management as we're moving forward. And I tend to say enterprise project management, process management, I should say, an old habit, because we're thinking business process. What if somebody doesn't identify as a business?
Right.
Are universities businesses? Yes, of course there is a dimension to that too, but universities don't primarily self-identify as a business in the same way that, say, Westpac does. Right. Not just because they have different actual work involved, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So, an enterprise, a calling, whatever somebody calls themselves and whatever they're doing, process management is a pretty important backbone. And having an organizational view of it, whether you start little or large, I'm going to suggest is pretty vital. I think a lot of organizations have found that out through that they can do it well, and they can do it at speed, and have had to have in 2020, regrettably, and not without some fair damage along the way.
Mm-hmm.
Not fun for anybody going through that. Fortunately, the university hasn't had that challenge.
Yes. No, it's definitely been a turbulent year for a lot of people. So
let's get rid of it. This one's no good.
That's right. So for those that are listening, and in a 40-minute conversation, we can only scrape the surface on a number of different topics. But for someone listening right now that they're listening to our conversation, they're gleaning a lot from what you're saying, and maybe what you're saying, it's sparking some ideas and how they can approach process management within their organization, whether they're at a level where they're whether that is to make sure they're bringing the frontline employees or the process practitioners into the decision making, or whether it is to how to approach executive sponsorship or executive leadership for that sponsorship. But maybe they're in an organization where it's, the BPM maturity is quite low. Where do they go to learn more about process management? Because, we've got the internet, but sometimes it can be quite overwhelming with all of the information out there. Where do you turn to? Who do you glean from? Who's right? Who's wrong? What would you say to that person that's listening right now?
Oh, that's a really broad question. It's a good one, because my answer is go look at the world, because there's a ton of stuff out there, internet notwithstanding. I think the problem is everybody has an answer. I have an answer too, but whether it's correct or not for you depends on the context you're in. So, for example, where would I start from if I was trying to improve project management processes, or I was trying to improve service management processes? I would start from the context that you're looking for. I would start by Googling the problem you have, because it's almost certain somebody else has had that problem. And case studies are a wonderful example of how people have thought about it and how they've tackled the problem and where they've gotten to next with that problem to resolve it. There's any number of really good sites from a pure process management perspective. There's great sites out there which will say, this is the way, the only way. And there's several of them that say they're their only way, but I'll leave that aside. In terms of the way you do work, do a flow diagram. The problem is also, what challenge, I should say, are you trying to cure? So, for example, I have seen people pick up excellent process in Lean Six Sigma and try to use it to build buildings. That's not going to work.
Right.
You need to be clear on what problem you're trying to solve. Start from the problem. And if you can't start from the problem, you're not exactly sure, but you know where you want to end up from, start from the outcome.
Yes, right.
Because whatever we do and however we're going to deliver it, it's going to surely need to connect to the outcome we want.
Yes.
And there's no magic bullet for doing that thinking for you. There are great tools and techniques out there, but again, they're situation dependent. So I want to be careful with my advice about what that actually is.
Yes. No, that's great. I think it's important, you've got to understand the why. You've got to understand the greater purpose of what you're doing. Otherwise, motivation will end up lacking, and attention will get diverted elsewhere. But we've been able to stretch out the conversation today to about, I think it's been 45 minutes or so. But Ian, I just want to thank you for sitting down with me, because we've been able to cover or touch on a couple of different areas. I know that the audience will glean value, and I'm sure that you're going to get a few people reaching out to you to dive deeper into a number of these topics that we've spoken about. So thanks again for joining me here today.
Oh, Daniel, thank you very much for having me. I welcome those outreach. I welcome learning opportunities too. As I said at the beginning, I don't have all of the jigsaw pieces. I have my set, and they may be useful for others, but I enjoy learning from others too. So thank you very much for the opportunity.